Elias pulled his cloak tighter against the biting wind, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the reins of his exhausted horse. The sky above the Judean hills was not merely dark, it was bruising, a violent shade of purple and charcoal that promised violence. He had been riding for 3 days, fleeing not just the capital but the haunting memories of a legion he had left behind. He was a man who knew the sound of steel clashing against steel, but the low growl of thunder rolling in from the great sea unsettled him more than any battle cry. The road ahead was washing away. Mud slicked the rocky path, and his horse stumbled, letting out a frightened whinny. Elias dismounted, soothing the beast with a rough hand. He could not afford to stop. The rumors in Jerusalem were that the zealots were rising, and the Roman response would be swift and brutal. He was caught in the middle, a former soldier who knew the empire's cruelty, and a scholar who knew his own people's stubborn pride. He belonged nowhere. A flash of lightning illuminated the valley below, revealing a cluster of stone structures clinging to the side of a cliff. It was a village, small and easily missed, hidden within the jagged teeth of the landscape. It was not on any map he had studied during his service. Desperation clawed at his throat. He needed shelter before the heavens tore open. He led the horse down the treacherous path, his boots sinking into the wet earth. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing at his clothes, whispering threats in his ears. It felt personal, as if the storm were hunting him. By the time he reached the outskirts of the settlement, the rain had begun to fall in sheets, cold and heavy. The village seemed abandoned. No lanterns burned in the windows, no smoke rose from the chimneys. Elias tied his horse to a sturdy olive tree beneath a rock overhang and drew the short dagger he kept concealed beneath his tunic. He approached the nearest door, a heavy slab of wood reinforced with iron bands. He hammered on it with his fist. "Open up!" he shouted over the roar of the wind. "I am a traveler seeking refuge." Silence answered him, heavy and thick. He raised his fist to strike again when the door creaked inward. It did not open fully, just enough to reveal a slice of warm, flickering light and half of a face. An eye, dark and assessing, stared out at him. "The storm takes what is left uncovered," a voice said. It was a woman's voice, firm but aged. "Why are you out in the chaos?" "I have nowhere else to go," Elias replied, his voice cracking with the cold. "The road is washed out. My horse is spent." The eye narrowed. "Are you a soldier?" Elias hesitated. He wore no armor, but he carried himself like one. The posture of a man always expecting an attack was hard to unlearn. "I was. Now, I am nothing but a man wet to the bone." The door opened wider, and the woman stepped back. "Come, we do not leave souls to the mercy of the tempest." Elias stepped across the threshold, and the immediate silence struck him harder than the wind. Your support gives a voice to the forgotten and strength to the weary. Hit like and subscribe to help us tell the stories others are too afraid to whisper, and stay close, because you won't believe the power that protects Elias when the rest of the world falls apart. The house was thick-walled, shutting out the fury of the storm completely. Inside, a fire crackled in a central hearth. Around it sat a dozen people, men, women, and children. They did not look like terrified refugees. They were calm. Some were mending nets. Others were breaking bread. They looked up at him not with fear, but with a quiet curiosity. The woman bolted the door behind him. "You may sit by the fire. We have little, but what we have is yours." Elias moved to the fire, the heat stinging his frozen skin. He sheathed his dagger, hoping no one had noticed it. A man sitting on a low stool poured a cup of warm wine and handed it to him. Elias drank greedily, feeling the liquid burn its way down his chest. "You are far from the main road," the man said. He had a beard streaked with gray and hands calloused from labor. "Most travelers avoid this valley. They say it is haunted by bandits." "I fear Rome more than bandits," Elias muttered, staring into the flames. The room went still. The mention of the empire usually brought curses or hushed whispers of rebellion. Here, it brought only a deepening of the peace that permeated the room. "Rome is a storm of its own," the woman said, sitting opposite him. "But it is a storm that stays outside these walls." Elias scoffed, a bitter sound. "Rome is everywhere. There is no wall high enough to keep them out. If they want this village, they will burn it to the ground." "They might burn the stones," the man said gently. but they cannot touch the dwelling place. Elias looked around the humble room. This house, a battering ram would shatter this door in seconds. Not this house, the man corrected. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. We speak of the secret place, the shelter of the Most High. You ran in here to escape the rain, stranger, but there is a shelter you can carry with you, a fortress that stands even when the legions march. Elias frowned. He had heard the priests in the temple speak in riddles, chanting psalms while counting coins. But these people were different. There was no pretense in their tone. They spoke of this secret place as if it were a physical location, a stronghold they had actually visited. I am too tired for riddles, Elias said, rubbing his eyes. I just want to survive the night. Survival is an instinct, the woman said softly. Safety is a promise. You are hunting for a place to hide your body. We are speaking of a place to hide your soul. Outside, thunder shook the very foundations of the earth. The wooden beams above them groaned. Elias flinched, his hand instinctively going to his side. But the child sitting near the fire did not even look up from the wooden toy he was carving. The contrast was jarring. Elias was the warrior, the man of action, yet he was the one trembling inside. These peasants were unarmed, yet they possessed an armor he could not see. Tell me, Elias whispered, the firelight dancing in his eyes. What is this place, and why does the storm not frighten you? The man with the gray beard smiled. Because we do not just visit the presence of God when the thunder cracks. We dwell there, and tonight, if you are willing to listen, we will show you the map. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows against the rough stone walls. Elias sat with his back against a pillar, his damp cloak drying stiffly around him. The storm outside had not abated. If anything, it had grown more furious, hammering against the roof like 1,000 fists demanding entry. Yet, the attention of everyone in the room was focused on the center, where the man with the gray beard, who Elias learned was named Matthias, unrolled a scroll of parchment. The leather of the scroll was old, worn smooth by countless fingers. Elias leaned forward. He had studied texts in the great libraries of Alexandria and the synagogues of Damascus, but there was a weight to this object that felt different. You said you were a soldier, Matthias began, his voice low and steady. So you understand authority. You know that when a centurion speaks, men move. When a general commands, armies march. But you also know that there is always someone higher. The general answers to the governor to the emperor. Elias nodded slowly, and the emperor answers to no one. That is why the world bleeds. That is where you are wrong, Matthias said. He placed a finger on the parchment. There is a title here, Elyon, the Most High. Elias looked at the Hebrew characters. He knew the word. It is a title for God. I have heard it shouted in the temple. It is not just a title, Matthias corrected him. It is a position. Elyon means the one who sits above everything, above the storm outside, above the sickness that stalks the villages to the south, above the legions, above Caesar. Elias laughed dryly. If he sits so high, then he is too far away to care about a man hiding in a leaking house. He sits high so that he can see everything, Matthias countered, his eyes sharp. When you dwell in the secret place of Elyon, you are stepping under his jurisdiction. You are claiming that the laws of Rome, the laws of chaos, even the laws of nature, are secondary to his rule. It is a legal standing, Elias. You are defecting from the kingdom of fear and entering the kingdom of the Most High. Elias shifted uncomfortably. The logic was sound, yet his heart rebelled. A legal standing does not stop a sword thrust. No, Matthias agreed, but it changes who handles the sword. And that brings us to the second name. He moved his finger down the text. El Shaddai, the Almighty, Elias translated automatically. More than that, the woman, whose name was Sarah, spoke up from the corner. She was pouring warm broth into clay bowls. Almighty sounds like a hammer. It sounds like force. But the root of the word speaks of the chest, of nourishment. It is the strength of a nursing mother or a provider. El Shaddai is the God who is enough, the God who sustains. Matthias looked at Elias. Do you see the picture the poet paints? Elyon is the king who rules the armies of heaven. El Shaddai is the father who feeds his children. One is the wall of fire, the other is the warmth of the hearth. To dwell in the shadow of the Almighty is to have both. infinite power, and intimate care. Elias took the bowl Sarah offered him. His hands were shaking less now. You speak beautiful words, but how does one dwell there? I cannot live in this room forever. Tomorrow, the sun will rise, the Romans will still be patrolling the roads, and I will still be a wanted man. This is the mistake everyone makes, Matthias said, rolling the scroll carefully. You think the secret place is a destination you travel to. You think it is a cave in the desert or a temple made of gold. But the text says, he who dwells. It implies a lifestyle, not a visit. Matthias leaned in closer, invading Elias's personal space. When you were a soldier, did you only wear your armor when you saw the enemy? Of course not, Elias replied, offended. We wore it when we marched. We wore it when we stood watch. If you waited until the arrow was in the air to put on your breastplate, you were already dead. Exactly, Matthias slammed his hand on his knee. Most men treat God like a reserve weapon. They call on him only when the arrow is flying. They visit him in crisis. But the promise of protection, the promise that 1,000 may fall at your side, but it will not come near you, that promise is for the one who lives in the armor, the one who wakes up in the secret place and sleeps in the secret place. Elias stared into the broth in his bowl. The steam rose in curling wisps. I have spent my life running, he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. From duty to duty, from battle to battle. I do not know how to stay. I do not know how to abide. It starts with a decision, Sarah said gently. Tonight, the storm rages. You could be out there, fighting the wind, trying to find your own path, bracing for every strike of lightning. But you chose to knock on our door. You chose to come in. You chose to sit. That was necessity, Elias said. That was the beginning of faith, Sarah corrected. To dwell is to stop trying to be your own savior. It is to say to the Lord, you are my refuge and my fortress. You must say it, Elias. You must declare it, not just think it. Elias looked at the closed door. He could imagine the world outside, wet, cold, hostile. A world where betrayal was common currency and life was cheap. Then he looked at Matthias, at Sarah, at the sleeping children in the corner. They had nothing, yet they had everything. They were under the shadow of something he could not see but could palpably feel. And if I stay, Elias asked, if I try to learn this dwelling, will the Romans disappear? No, Matthias said, his voice solemn. The lion will still roar, the fowler will still lay his traps, but you will not be afraid of the terror by night. You will walk through the valley of the shadow of death, but you will not build a house there. You will pass through, covered by wings that are stronger than iron. Elias finished the broth and set the bowl down. He felt a strange sensation in his chest, a loosening of a knot that had been tight for years. The skepticism was still there, guarding his heart like a sentry, but the gate was cracking open. Teach me, Elias said. Teach me how to stay. Matthias smiled, and the lines around his eyes deepened. Rest tonight, traveler, for tomorrow we do not just talk of protection. Tomorrow we walk into the snare of the fowler, and you will see if El Shaddai keeps his word. The journey to Bethany was fraught with a tension that had nothing to do with the Roman patrols. Elias rode in silence alongside Matthias, his mind a battlefield of conflicting instincts. The soldier in him wanted to keep moving, to find high ground, to assess threats. But the new, fragile seed of faith planted the night before urged him to trust the path of this gray-bearded stranger. They arrived at a modest home just as the heat of the day began to wane. The atmosphere here was different from the hidden village. It was busier, charged with the energy of preparation. Matthias was greeted warmly, but Elias stood back, his hand hovering near his dagger. He watched as two women dominated the space, their presence filling the courtyard. One was a whirlwind of motion. Her name was Martha. She moved with the efficiency of a logistics commander, directing servants, checking food stores, and scrubbing surfaces until the stone wore thin. Elias recognized her energy immediately. It was the energy of survival. It was the frantic pace of a soldier digging a trench before nightfall. She looked at Elias not with hostility, but with the distracted panic of someone carrying the weight of the world. The master is coming, Martha said, wiping sweat from her brow, her eyes darting to the unwashed basins. And we are not ready. We are never ready. Elias felt a kinship with her. He understood the need to be ready. If you were not ready, you died. If the perimeter was not secure, the enemy entered. But then there was the sister, Mary. While Martha ran, Mary sat. The teacher arrived shortly after, a man whose presence seemed to alter the air pressure in the room. He did not carry a sword, yet Elias felt an urge to kneel that was stronger than any command he had ever received from a centurion. The teacher sat in the shade of the olive tree, and Mary sat at his feet. She was not lazy. Her stillness was active. She was listening with a ferocity that matched Martha's labor. Martha finally snapped. The clatter of a dropped clay pot echoed through the courtyard. She marched over to the teacher, her hands on her hips, her frustration boiling over. "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." Elias held his breath. In the army, insubordination was punished. A commander did not tolerate complaints about the workload. He expected the teacher to rebuke Mary, to send her back to the kitchens. That was how the world worked. You worked, you sweated, you earned your keep. But the teacher looked at Martha with a tenderness that disarmed Elias completely. "Martha, Martha," the teacher said, repeating her name as if to calm a frightened bird. "You are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her." Elias felt the words strike him like a physical blow. Anxious and troubled about many things. That was his life. That was his entire existence. He was always Martha, running, fixing, defending, preparing for a disaster that might never come, while missing the life that was right in front of him. He looked at Mary. She had chosen to dwell. She was not visiting the teacher's presence. She was abiding in it. She had built her shelter at his feet. The Roman legions could march past the gate right now, and Elias suspected Mary would not even flinch. She was safe, not because the walls were thick, but because she was close to the source. Matthias leaned in close to Elias. "Do you see it, soldier? You think safety comes from doing. You think if you run fast enough, fight hard enough, you will be secure. But the secret place is found in the stopping. It is found in the surrender." Elias looked at his own calloused hands. They were hands trained for war, for gripping a gladius, for strangling enemies. Could they learn to be still? Could he sit when every instinct screamed at him to stand guard? "I do not know how to stop," Elias confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "If I stop, the fear catches up." "Then let it catch up," Matthias said. "And let the teacher handle it. That is what it means to dwell. You trade your anxiety for his peace, but you cannot make the trade if you are running." That evening, for the first time in 20 years, Elias did not check the locks on the door 3 times. He sat in the corner of the courtyard, watching the stars appear, and practiced the terrified, brave act of doing absolutely nothing but trusting. The peace of Bethany was a balm, but the road called them back. 2 days later, Elias and Matthias were navigating the rocky passes back toward the Jordan Valley. The air had changed again. The heaviness returned. Rumors traveled faster than men in Judea, and the word on the wind was that a new procurator had issued warrants for dissidents and troublemakers. Fear, the old familiar enemy, began to crawl up Elias's spine. It whispered to him in the rhythm of the horse's hooves, "They know who you are. They are waiting. You were a fool to soften. You were a fool to sit." By the time they made camp in a shallow ravine, Elias was pacing. His hand kept drifting to the hilt of his hidden dagger. His eyes scanned the ridge line, seeing Roman helmets in every shadow, hearing footsteps and the skittering of lizards. "You are vibrating with terror," Matthias observed, sitting calmly by a small fire. He was roasting a piece of fish, unbothered by the growing darkness. "We are exposed here," Elias snapped. "This ravine is a trap. If they come from the north, we have nowhere to run." "You are thinking," Matthias said, chewing slowly, "and you are feeling, but you are not saying." Elias stopped pacing and glared at the old man. "What does speaking have to do with it? If a patrol comes, words will not stop them." "That is where you are wrong." Matthias stood up, wiping his hands. "Do you remember the psalm? I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress." The writer does not say, "I will hope," or "I will think." He speaks, "Ideclatus." "Why does it matter?" Elias demanded. "Because fear is a bully," Matthias replied, his voice hardening. "And a bully dominates the conversation until you silence him. Your mind is filled with the noise of the enemy. You must interrupt it with the voice of truth. Life and death are in the power of the tongue, Elias. You must announce to the atmosphere, to the demons, and to your own trembling heart who your God is. Elias looked out into the black mouth of the ravine. The silence was deafening. He felt foolish. He was a grown man, a warrior. Was he supposed to shout at the rocks? Try it, Matthias challenged him. Say it. God is my refuge. Elias opened his mouth, but the words stuck in his throat. It felt like a lie. It felt weak. His training told him that a refuge was a stone tower, not a prayer. I cannot, Elias whispered. You must, Matthias pressed. Faith is not a feeling. It is a decision. Speak it until you believe it. Elias took a deep breath. He closed his eyes, visualizing the terror that hunted him, the faceless soldiers, the shame of his past, the uncertainty of tomorrow. He pushed against the weight of it. He is my refuge, Elias said. The words were quiet, shaky. Louder, Matthias commanded. Tell the darkness. He is my refuge, Elias said, his voice gaining strength. He is my fortress, my God. In him I will trust. The sound of his own voice startled him. It echoed off the canyon walls. Trust, trust, trust. Something shifted. The crushing weight on his chest lightened. The shadows on the ridge stopped looking like soldiers and returned to being mere rocks. It was not magic. The danger was still theoretically there, but Elias's relationship to the danger had changed. He was no longer a victim waiting to be caught. He was a man standing inside a fortress. A fortress is not just a hiding place, Elias realized aloud. It is a place of strength. It is where you stand your ground. Yes, Matthias nodded, sitting back down. Now you are getting it. You do not just survive the night, Elias. You command the night. You have declared your allegiance. You are under the covering now. Elias sat by the fire. He was still vigilant, but the panic was gone. He had spoken a reality into existence that was truer than his fear. He looked at the darkness and whispered, one last time, with the confidence of a general, my God, in him I will trust. The market town of Jericho was a sensory assault. The smell of spices, unwashed bodies, and animal dung hung heavy in the humid air. Elias walked 10 paces behind Matthias, his hood pulled low. They needed supplies, but Elias knew this place was dangerous. It was a hub for spies, double agents who sold information to the Romans and the zealots alike. Stay close, Matthias murmured, and keep your eyes open. The snare of the fowler is rarely seen until the trap snaps shut. Elias scanned the crowd. He saw a face. He recognized a merchant named Silas. Years ago, Silas had provided Elias with maps and safe passage. He was a slippery man, but useful. Silas caught Elias's eye and gave a subtle nod, gesturing toward a narrow alleyway behind a tannery. Elias hesitated. He needed information on the road ahead. Silas would know where the patrols were. It was a logical risk. I know him, Elias whispered to Matthias. He can help us. Matthias looked at the merchant, then at the alley. He frowned. I do not have peace about this. He is an old contact, Elias argued. The soldier in him taking over. We need intelligence. Trust me. Elias broke away from Matthias and moved toward the alley. Silas smiled, an expression that did not quite reach his eyes, and retreated into the shadows. Elias followed. The alley was cool and dim, cut off from the noise of the market. Elias, Silas said, stepping out from behind a stack of crates. It has been a long time. You look tired. The road is long, Elias replied, keeping his distance. I need to know if the northern pass is clear. The north? Silas chuckled. The north is crawling with legionnaires, but I know a way, a smuggler's route. Come, I have a map inside. He gestured to a low door. Elias took a step forward. Logic dictated he should go. This was how he had survived for years. Networking, trading favors, finding the back door. But then, he felt it. It was not a sound. It was not a visual cue. It was a check in his spirit. A sudden, cold heaviness in his gut. It was the secret place warning him. The voice of the fortress whispering, stop. Elias froze. He looked at the door. He looked at Silas. He noticed a bead of sweat running down Silas's temple, despite the cool shade. He noticed Silas's eyes, darting momentarily to the rooftops. Surely he shall deliver you from the snare of the fowler. The verse Matthias had recited thundered in Elias's mind. The fowler did not hunt with a roar, he hunted with a lure. No, Elias said. What? Silas's smile faltered. Do not be a fool. The patrol will be here within the hour. You need this. I do not need your map, Elias said, backing away. Elias, come inside, Silas insisted, his voice rising in pitch. He reached out a hand. At that exact moment, a cart, heavily laden with clay pots, turned the corner of the alley, driven by a clumsy boy. The wheel struck a loose stone, and the cart tipped. Hundreds of pots crashed onto the cobblestones with a deafening, shattering roar. The noise caused a flock of pigeons on the roof to take flight in a burst of wings, and in that distraction, the hidden archer on the roof flinched. A tile dislodged by the archer's boot clattered down, landing right where Elias had been standing seconds before. Elias looked up. He saw the glint of a helmet, a Roman ambush. Silas had sold him out. Traitor, Elias hissed. Silas lunged for him, but Elias was already moving. He did not fight, he did not engage. He remembered the promise. He will deliver you. He turned and sprinted back toward the market, weaving through the chaos of the broken pottery. The dust from the clay created a sudden, choking cloud, obscuring him from the archer's sight. He burst back into the sunlight of the market, grabbing Matthias by the arm. Walk, Elias commanded, forcing himself not to run and draw attention. Walk, now. They blended into the flow of the crowd, disappearing into the mass of humanity just as heavy boots began to pound down the alleyway behind them. They did not stop until they were miles outside the city, hidden in a grove of date palms. Elias leaned against a tree, his chest heaving, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had walked right into the trap. Logic had led him there. But something else presence had pulled him back. You saw it? Matthias asked quietly. I felt it, Elias corrected, looking at his hands. They were trembling, not from fear, but from awe. I felt the check, and then the cart, the noise. It was perfect timing, if that cart had not fallen. The angels have charge over you, Matthias said, closing his eyes in a brief prayer, to keep you in all your ways. You were delivered, Elias. Not by your sword, but by the snare breaker. Elias looked back toward Jericho. He realized that the secret place was not just a passive shelter for resting. It was an active intelligence system. It was a shield that moved. He had almost died today, but the snare of the fowler had snapped shut on empty air. He surely delivers, Elias whispered, the reality of the promise sinking into his marrow. Surely. The descent into the valley of the Jordan was usually a relief from the arid highlands, but today the air felt stagnant, thick with a heat that did not move. Elias and Matthias rode toward the settlement of Beth Hogla, a resting place for travelers before the long stretch to the Dead Sea. But as the mud brick walls of the village came into view, Elias pulled his horse to a halt. There was no movement at the gate. The usual clamor of merchants haggling, donkeys braying, and children playing was absent. A heavy, suffocating silence lay over the town, broken only by the low, mournful howling of a dog somewhere within the walls. Something is wrong, Elias said, his hand drifting to his weapon. It is too quiet. Matthias stared at the gate, his expression unreadable. It is the pestilence. We heard whispers of it in Jericho, but I did not think it had traveled this far south. Elias felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck that had nothing to do with the wind. He had faced lines of archers and charges of cavalry, but sickness was a different kind of enemy. You could not parry a fever. You could not outflank a plague. It moved in the darkness, invisible, striking the strong and the weak without discrimination. We should go around, Elias said, his voice tight. If we ride hard, we can bypass the walls and camp in the open desert. And leave them? Matthias asked softly. We cannot fight a sickness, old man, Elias snapped, his fear manifesting as anger. This is not a battle. It is a death sentence. If we enter, we breathe what they breathe. Matthias turned his horse toward the gate. The promise was not that the pestilence would cease to exist. The promise was that you would not fear it. He shall deliver you from the perilous pestilence. How can he deliver you if you are running away from the very shadows where his light is needed? Elias cursed under his breath, a soldier's oath, but he spurred his horse forward. He could not let the old man ride alone. As they passed under the archway of the gate, the reality of the pestilence that walks in darkness became clear. It was not just a disease of the body, it was a sickness of the soul. The streets were empty, but Elias could feel eyes watching them from behind shuttered windows. Doors were barred. A few bodies lay in the alleys, covered with rough cloth, abandoned by families too terrified to bury them. The fear in the air was palpable, a living thing. It was a suspicion that turned neighbor against neighbor. This was the darkness the psalmist spoke of, not the absence of light, but the absence of hope, the absence of connection. A man stumbled out of a doorway, his face gaunt, his eyes wide with delirium. He held a staff as a weapon, waving it feebly at them. "Go back," the man croaked. "Death is here. The air is poison." Elias's horse shied, and he struggled to control the beast. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him that the air was poison, that every breath was a gamble. He felt the phantom itch of infection on his skin. "Peace," Matthias said, dismounting calmly. He walked toward the terrified man, his hands open. "Do not touch me," the man screamed, backing away. "I am unclean. Everyone is unclean." Matthias stopped. He did not touch the man, but he looked at him with a gaze so steady it seemed to anchor the frantic energy in the street. "We are not here to bring death. We are here to bring water. Where is the well?" The banality of the question stunned the man. He lowered his staff. The well is in the square, but no one goes there. We are afraid to gather. Fear is the greater sickness," Matthias said, looking back at Elias. "Elias, bring the water skins." Elias dismounted. His legs felt heavy, as if he were wading through deep water. He walked toward the well in the center of the square. He forced himself to breathe deeply, fighting the urge to hold his breath. "Surely he shall deliver you." He repeated the words in his mind, over and over, trying to drown out the panic. As he drew the water, a woman watched him from a window. Then another door cracked open. They were watching to see if he would fall dead. When he did not, when he stood straight and drank from the ladle, the tension in the square shifted. Matthias began to move from house to house. He did not enter, but he left water and bread at the doorsteps. He spoke words of comfort through the cracks in the wood. Elias followed him, carrying the supplies. "Stay under the wings," Matthias whispered to Elias as they walked through the shadowed alleyways. "Do you feel the panic trying to land on you, like a bird of prey?" "I feel it," Elias admitted. "I feel the urge to wash my skin until it bleeds." "That is the pestilence of the mind," Matthias said. "It tells you that you are vulnerable. It tells you that God's protection is thin. You must visualize the wings, Elias. Great, heavy feathers covering you. The air you breathe is filtered through His holiness. The ground you walk on is sanctified by His presence. The sickness may walk in darkness, but you are children of the day." They spent hours in the village. They helped drag the dead to a respectful place for burial, covering their faces. They offered water to the fevered. Elias waited for the headache, the cough, the weakness. But it did not come. Instead, a strange heat grew in his chest, not fever, but a fierce, burning defiance against the fear. By late afternoon, the hysteria had broken. The villagers were still sick, but they were no longer paralyzed. They began to open their doors, to help one another. The invisible monster lost its power when two strangers refused to bow to it. As they rode out of the village at dusk, Elias looked at his hands. They were dirty, but they were steady. He realized that the pestilence that walks in darkness relied on the darkness to work. It relied on the unknown. But when he had walked into the center of it, carrying the light of the secret place, the darkness had no choice but to recede. "You did well," Matthias said quietly. "I was terrified," Elias confessed. "Courage is not the absence of terror," Matthias replied. "It is the decision that the terror does not have the final word. You walked through the fire, soldier, and you do not even smell of smoke." They made camp that night on a ridge overlooking the salt flats of the Dead Sea. The air was clearer here, dry and crisp, but the events of the day had left Elias's soul raw. The physical exhaustion was deep, yet as he lay on his bedroll, sleep felt like a distant country he could not reach. The sun sank below the horizon, and the world turned to shades of indigo and black. This was the hour of the terror by night. In the silence of the desert, The distractions of the day vanished. There was no village to save, no horse to ride, no conversation to maintain. There was only Elias and the darkness. And in that darkness, the memories came. They came not as thoughts, but as vivid, waking nightmares. He saw the faces of men he had killed in skirmishes years ago. He saw the disappointed eyes of his father. He felt the cold shame of the times he had chosen survival over honor. The shadows of the rocks around the camp seemed to twist into the shapes of accusers. Elias sat up, his breath coming in short gasps. His heart raced with a panic that was sharper than what he had felt in the plague village. This was different. This was internal. It was the crushing weight of the what-ifs. What if the sickness is incubating in me right now? What if the Romans are tracking us? What if I am following a fool into the wasteland? What if God does not see me? He looked over at Matthias. The old man was wrapped in his cloak, sleeping deeply, his breathing rhythmic and peaceful. The sight irritated Elias. How could he sleep? How could he lie there so exposed, so vulnerable, while the night was filled with teeth? Elias grabbed his dagger and stood up. He paced the perimeter of the firelight. He told himself he was keeping watch, but he knew he was running from the silence. The terror by night was not a monster under the bed. It was the whisper in the ear that said, "You are alone. You are unprotected. It is all going to end in ruin. Put the knife away, Elias." The voice startled him. Matthias had not moved, had not opened his eyes, yet he spoke clearly. "I am keeping watch," Elias said defensively. "Someone has to." Matthias sat up slowly, rubbing his face. "You are not keeping watch. You are feeding the terror. You are pacing like a caged animal because you do not trust the bars to hold." "I cannot sleep," Elias admitted, dropping the dagger into the dirt. "When I close my eyes, the war starts." Matthias nodded, his expression softening in the firelight. The terror by night. It is a specific weapon of the enemy. He knows that when the body is tired, the will is weak. He attacks the imagination when the sun goes down. He paints pictures of disaster on the canvas of your mind. "How do I stop it?" Elias asked, sitting down heavily. "I cannot fight a thought with a sword." "No," Matthias agreed. "You fight it with a shift change." "A shift change?" "You are a soldier," Matthias said. "You know that no man can stand watch forever. If a sentry does not sleep, he becomes useless. He hallucinates, he makes mistakes. So, there is a rotation. One watches, one sleeps." "We are only two men," Elias argued. "If I sleep, and you sleep, who watches?" Matthias pointed a gnarled finger toward the sky, vast and filled with stars. "Behold, he who keeps Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep." The words hung in the dry air. "Do you understand the theology of sleep, Elias?" Matthias continued. "Sleep is an act of trust. It is the most vulnerable position a human can take. You are unconscious. You cannot defend yourself. You cannot produce. You cannot plan. To sleep is to say, 'God, I am not the general of this universe. You are. I am going off duty, and I trust that you remain on the throne.'" Elias looked at the fire. He had always viewed sleep as a weakness, a biological necessity to be minimized. He had never thought of it as a spiritual discipline. "The terror comes," Matthias said, "because you think you are the only one holding your world together. You think if you stop worrying, the roof will collapse. But Psalm 91 says, 'You shall not be afraid of the terror by night.' Why? Because you are under the shadow. The shadow implies that there is a massive figure standing over you, taking the heat, taking the blow, taking the watch." Matthias picked up a small stone and tossed it into the darkness. "Give the watch to him, Elias." Literally. "Tell him." Elias felt foolish again, but the desperation for rest pushed him past his pride. He looked up at the stars, which seemed cold and distant, and tried to see the watchman behind them. "Lord," Elias whispered, "I am tired. I cannot fight the memories tonight. I cannot fight the fear of tomorrow." He paused, imagining himself unbuckling his invisible armor, laying down his heavy shield. "I am going off duty. You are the watchman. You do not sleep, so I can." He lay back down on the hard ground. The shadows were still there. The memories were still hovering at the edge of his mind. But he had made a transaction. He had handed the responsibility of his safety to El Shaddai. "He gives his beloved sleep," Matthias murmured, lying back down. Elias closed his eyes. The terror tried to whisper, "What if?" But Elias answered back with the new truth he had learned. The watchman is awake. The watchman is awake. Slowly, the tension drained from his shoulders. The racing heart slowed to a steady rhythm. The knot in his stomach uncoiled. For the first time in years, Elias did not fall into a fitful, exhausted collapse. He drifted, carried by a peace that defied the logic of the desert. He slept not as a soldier on the run, but as a child in a fortress, guarded by the angel of the Lord. And in the morning, when he woke, the sun was shining, and he was still alive. The morning sun beat down on the limestone cliffs of the Wadi Kelt, bleaching the world into blinding shades of white and ochre. Elias and Matthias moved cautiously along the ancient road that snaked between Jerusalem and the valley floor. The silence of the desert was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that vibrated through the ground. "We are being watched," Elias murmured, his eyes scanning the ridgelines. The hairs on his arms stood on end. This was not the spiritual heaviness of the plague village. This was the sharp, metallic taste of imminent violence. "The arrow that flies by day," Matthias noted, his voice calm but low. "This is the hour of open conflict. The enemy no longer hides in the shadows or whispers in the dark. He steps into the light and challenges you." As they rounded a sharp bend where the canyon narrowed, the ambush sprang. It was not directed at them, but at a Roman supply caravan struggling up the incline ahead. A dozen figures, zealots, faces wrapped in cloth, burst from the rocks above, raining stones and javelins down on the soldiers. "Get back!" Elias shouted, pulling Matthias behind a large boulder. But the chaos spilled over. The Roman formation broke, and the soldiers scattered, fighting with desperate ferocity. A group of 3 legionnaires, cut off from their unit, charged toward Elias and Matthias, seeing them as potential enemies. "Draw your sword, Elias." The instinct in his blood screamed, but Matthias placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. The grip was surprisingly strong. "The psalm says his truth shall be your shield and buckler," Matthias said, his voice cutting through the din of clashing steel. "A buckler is for close combat, a shield is for the distance. Do not fight them with steel. Stand in the truth." "They are going to kill us," Elias hissed, watching the soldiers close the distance, their gladii drawn. "Stand," Matthias commanded. An arrow, fired from the cliffs above by a zealot archer, whistled through the air. It was aimed at the lead soldier charging them. It struck the man in the gap between his helmet and breastplate. He dropped instantly, sliding in the dust to Elias's feet. The other 2 soldiers faltered, looking up at the cliffs. In that moment of distraction, a rock slide triggered by the fighting above cascaded down, separating Elias and Matthias from the soldiers with a wall of dust and debris. Elias coughed, waving the dust away. He realized that if he had charged forward to fight, he would have been buried under those rocks. By standing still, by dwelling in the position Matthias held, he had been saved. But the danger was not over. The battle was turning into a riot. Arrows were flying everywhere, now stray shots, panicked volleys. They zipped through the air like angry hornets. One struck the boulder inches from Elias's face, shattering into splinters. "His truth," Matthias repeated, pressing his back against the stone. "Focus, Elias. What is the truth?" "The truth is we are trapped in a kill zone," Elias yelled, flinching as another arrow skittered across the ground. "That is the fact," Matthias corrected. "The truth is that we are surrounded by favor as with a shield. The arrow cannot find you unless permission is granted from the throne." Elias closed his eyes for a second, forcing his mind to shift gears. He visualized the shield. Not a Roman scutum made of wood and leather, but a barrier of light woven from the promises he had learned. "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge." He opened his eyes. The panic receded, replaced by a hyper-aware clarity. He saw the path through the chaos. "We move now," Elias said, his voice steady, "to the gap in the ridge." They moved together. It was a surreal dance. Arrows flew past them so close Elias could hear the feathers cutting the wind, but not one touched them. It was as if they were walking in a different dimension, visible yet untouchable. They were navigating the storm of the arrow that flies by day, protected by a sovereignty that bent probability in their favor. The skirmish in the canyon had been the spark. Now came the fire. The Roman garrison at Jericho had been alerted, and a full cohort was marching up the wadi. Simultaneously, Hundreds of rebels poured down from the hills. Elias and Matthias were no longer on the edge of a fight. They were in the center of a war. The noise was deafening, the screams of men, the thunder of hooves, the crunch of iron on bone. The canyon floor became a slaughterhouse. 1,000 may fall at your side, Matthias shouted over the roar, gripping his staff, and 10,000 at your right hand. Elias watched in horror. To his left, a group of travelers who had tried to run were cut down by a sweeping line of cavalry. To his right, the zealots who had initiated the attack were being decimated by disciplined Roman shield walls. People were falling everywhere. It was a harvest of death. Panic seized the crowd trapped in the valley. Men pushed and trampled one another to escape. Elias felt the surge of the mob pushing him toward the cliff edge. "Hold your ground!" Elias grabbed Matthias, anchoring him against the flow. A spear, thrown blindly from the melee, flew straight toward Elias's chest. He saw it coming. Time seemed to slow down. He could not dodge. The crowd was too thick. He braced for the impact, the inevitable piercing of his flesh. But at the last second, a Roman horse, maddened by a wound, reared up and bucked, knocking a soldier into the path of the spear. The soldier took the blow meant for Elias. The horse then galloped past, clearing a space around them. "It shall not come near you." Matthias's voice sounded like a trumpet. "Do you see it, Elias? Do you see the line?" Elias looked around. It was undeniable. There was a circle of safety around them, perhaps only a few feet wide. Inside that circle, there was stillness. Outside, there was carnage. 1,000 were falling. 10,000 were breaking. But the destruction stopped at the edge of their invisible dwelling place. The air was thick with blood and dust, yet Elias felt a strange, cool breeze. He realized they were not just lucky survivors. They were marked men. The secret place was not a location. It was a mobile sanctuary. They carried the temple with them. A centurion, blood-spattered and furious, spotted them standing amidst the ruin. He raised his gladius and marched toward them, intent on killing anything that stood. Elias's hand went to his dagger, but he stopped. He remembered the angel. He remembered the fortress. He stood tall, looking the centurion in the eye. He did not beg. He did not fight. He simply stood in the authority of Elion. The centurion hesitated. He frowned, confusion clouding his rage. He looked at Elias, then at Matthias. Something about their composure, their stillness in the middle of hell, unsettled him. It was unnatural. It spooked him. The centurion lowered his sword, spat on the ground, and turned away to find an easier target. He could not cross the line, Elias whispered, stunned. He wanted to, but he could not. "Because you are not just flesh and blood to him right now," Matthias said, wiping dust from his face. "You are a prohibited target. The angels have blocked the way." They stood there for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes, as the wave of death crashed around them, but never touched them. They were the eye of the hurricane. Elias understood then that the promise was not that he would never see battle, but that the battle would not conquer him. He was witnessing the fall of thousands, yet he remained standing. The sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the valley. The fighting had ended as quickly as it had begun. The Romans held the road. The rebels had scattered or died. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise of battle. It was the silence of judgment. Elias and Matthias walked slowly through the aftermath. The ground was littered with broken weapons, shattered carts, and the bodies of those who had believed their strength would save them. "Only with your eyes shall you look," Matthias recited quietly, his tone devoid of gloating, filled only with a terrible sadness. "And see the reward of the wicked." Elias looked. He saw the bodies of the Roman soldiers who had delighted in cruelty. He saw the zealot leader, the one who had mocked the idea of peace, lying face down in the dirt, betrayed by his own ambition. He saw the fowler, a spy Elias recognized from the city, caught in the crossfire of the very trap he had helped set. It was a grim tableau of cause and effect. Those who lived by the sword had died by it. Those who trusted in their cunning had been outsmarted by death. "This is not vengeance," Elias said, looking at the destruction. "This is gravity. It is the weight of their own choices crushing them." "Yes," Matthias agreed. "God does not need to be cruel. He simply allows evil to run its course. Sin carries its own punishment within it. The trap the wicked sets is the trap they fall into." Elias walked past a group of prisoners being chained by the Romans. They were weeping, cursing, blaming everyone but themselves. Elias felt no anger toward them, only pity. They had chosen the open field. They had refused the fortress. He stopped near the cliff edge. Below, the valley stretched out, scarred but enduring. He realized that he had survived not because he was better or stronger or more righteous than the men lying in the dust. He was a sinner like them. He had a past like them. "Why me?" Elias asked, looking at Matthias. "Why am I standing when they are fallen? I have blood on my hands too." "Because you ran to the refuge," Matthias said simply. "That is the only difference, Elias. The fortress is open to everyone, but few choose to enter. You chose to dwell. You chose to trust. Grace is not fair. It is generous, but it must be received." Elias looked at the setting sun. He felt a profound shift in his soul. The survivor's guilt that usually plagued him was absent, replaced by a deep, reverent gratitude. He had seen the reward of the wicked, the inevitable end of a life lived without God, and it had terrified him more than the sword. It made him want to run deeper into the secret place, to bolt the door and never leave. "We must go," Matthias said, turning toward the path that led out of the valley. "The night is coming, and we have a journey to finish." Elias followed him, stepping carefully over the debris of war. He did not look back. He had seen enough. His eyes had looked, and he had seen the distinction between the righteous and the wicked. And as he walked, he whispered the words that had become his breath. "Because you have made the Lord, who is my refuge, even the Most High, your dwelling place, no evil shall befall you." He was no longer just a soldier surviving a war. He was a son walking home. The ascent into the hill country was known as the ascent of blood, not because of the red clay that slicked the path, but because of the thieves who made their living in its narrow, choking turns. Elias moved with the wary precision of a wolf entering another pack's territory. Matthias walked ahead, his pace steady, his staff tapping a rhythm against the stones that echoed too loudly in the silence of the gorge. "This is foolishness," Elias hissed, closing the distance between them. "We are walking into a bottleneck. If they come from above, we are dead. If they come from behind, we are trapped." "We are not walking alone," Matthias replied, not breaking his stride. "He shall give his angels charge over you, to keep you in all your ways." Elias rolled his eyes at the sky. "Angels do not carry shields, old man. They do not block arrows. I need a cohort, not a choir." As the words left his mouth, the path narrowed to a mere ledge. From Daesh, on one side, the sheer rock face rose toward the sun. On the other, a drop into a dry riverbed deep enough to break every bone in a man's body. Elias pressed his shoulder against the cliff wall, shuffling sideways. Then, it happened. A loose slab of limestone, weakened by the recent storms, shifted under Elias's weight. It gave way with a sickening grind. Elias felt gravity seize him. His boot slid into empty air. His hand clawed at the rock face, finding no purchase. He was falling. The drop waited to claim him. He shut his eyes, bracing for the impact, for the snap of his spine. But the fall stopped. It was not a gradual deceleration. It was an abrupt, impossible halt. It felt as though a hand, firm, solid, and immensely strong, had grabbed the back of his tunic and yanked him backward. The force of it slammed him back against the cliff wall. Elias gasped, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked around wildly. Matthias was 10 paces ahead, too far to have reached him. There was no one else on the ledge. There was no branch, no root, no rope. "Did you see that?" Elias wheezed, his voice trembling. Matthias stopped and looked back. "I saw you stumble, and I saw you stand." "I did not just stumble," Elias insisted, pushing himself away from the wall, testing his legs. "I fell. I was gone. Something pushed me back." Matthias smiled, a knowing glint in his eye. "Lest you dash your foot against a stone. That is the promise, Elias. It is not just about the great battles. It is about the misstep, the accident, the gravity that wants to pull you down." Elias looked at the empty air beside him. He felt a strange chill, not of fear, but of proximity. He had been touched. He was sure of it. The sensation of that grip on his tunic lingered, a phantom pressure. "They are real," Elias whispered. They are actually here. Charge over you, Matthias corrected. It is a military term. They are under orders. You are their assignment. They continued the climb, but Elias moved differently now. He did not walk with the arrogance of a soldier, but with the reverence of a man walking through a royal court. As they neared the crest of the pass, the threat Elias had feared materialized. 3 men stepped out from behind a boulder. They were ragged, their eyes hard, holding rusted blades and clubs. Bandits, the predators of the pass. Elias instinctively reached for his dagger, stepping in front of Matthias. "Stay back," he warned the old man. The leader of the bandits grinned, revealing broken teeth. 2 travelers, one old, one tired. This will be easy. He took a step forward, raising his club. Elias braced himself. He was outnumbered, but he had the high ground. He calculated the strikes. He would take the leader first, then kick the second man over the edge. But the leader stopped. The bandit's grin faded, replaced by a look of confusion, then sudden, stark terror. He looked at Elias. Then his eyes drifted to the space immediately to Elias's right, and then to his left. The bandit's face went pale, draining of blood. He took a stumbling step back. We want no trouble," the bandit stammered, lowering his club. "Then move," Elias barked, keeping his weapon raised. The second bandit was tugging at the leader's arm, his eyes wide, fixed on the empty air behind Elias. "Let them go," the man whispered frantically. "Look at them. Look at the size of them." Elias frowned. He was not a large man. Matthias was frail. What were they seeing? "Go!" the leader shouted to his men, turning and scrambling up the rocks, abandoning their ambush. They ran as if the legions of Rome were breathing down their necks. In moments, the pass was empty again. Elias stood frozen, his dagger still in hand. The silence returned, heavy and profound. "Why did they run?" Elias asked, sheathing his blade slowly. "We were easy prey." Matthias walked past him, tapping his staff. "They did not run from us, Elias. They ran from the escort." Elias looked to his right and left. He saw nothing but heat, haze, and rock, but he remembered the grip on his tunic. He remembered the look in the bandits' eyes. "They keep you in all your ways," Matthias murmured. "Visible to the enemy, invisible to you, unless you have eyes to see. Come, we are safe." They descended into the Jordan Valley as the sun began to dip, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and violet. They sought refuge in a cave known to the Essenes, a sect of desert mystics. The cave was cool and smelled of dry sage and ancient dust. Inside, a single oil lamp burned, illuminating a figure sitting on a woven mat. It was a man, thin as a rail, with eyes that were clouded over milky white and unseeing. He was blind. His name was Tobiah. "Matthias," the blind man said, his voice scratching like dry leaves, "and you have brought a warrior who smells of fear." Elias bristled. "I am not afraid. I am cautious. There is a difference." "Is there?" Tobiah cackled softly. "Sit, warrior. The tea is hot." Elias sat, his back against the rough stone wall. The events of the mountain pass were still swirling in his mind, but the reality of their situation was crashing back in. They were hiding in a hole in the ground. The Roman governor had placed a bounty on insurgents, and Elias fit the description. "We cannot stay here long," Elias said, accepting a cup of bitter herbal tea. "The official, who hunts us, the one they call the Lion, he has spies everywhere. He has a cohort of cavalry sweeping the valley. It is only a matter of time before they find this cave." "And then what?" Tobiah asked, sipping his tea, his blind eyes staring at nothing. "Then we die," Elias said flatly. "There are 2 of us. 3, if we count you, and you are blind. They have horses, spears, armor, and the math is simple." "The math," Tobiah chuckled again. "You soldiers and your math. You count the swords you can see and think you have the sum of the battle." "It is not a joke," Elias snapped, his patience fraying. "I saw the dust clouds on the horizon before we entered the cave. They are coming. We are surrounded." Matthias remained silent, feeding small twigs into the fire. He seemed content to let the blind man handle this. Tobiah set his cup down. His face grew serious. "You remind me of the servant of the prophet Elisha. He woke up one morning and saw the city surrounded by the Syrian army. He cried out, 'Alas, master, what shall we do?' He was terrified because he only trusted his physical eyes. He was realistic, Elias muttered. He was blind, Tobiah corrected. Just as you are blind, Elias. Elias stared at the man. I have 20/20 vision. You are the one sitting in darkness. Am I? Tobiah leaned forward. I sit in a cave, yet I see the light of Elyon. You stand under the open sky, yet you see only shadows. Tobiah reached out a hand, his fingers groping the air until they found Elias's wrist. His grip was surprisingly firm. Lord, Tobiah prayed, his voice suddenly booming with authority that shook the dust from the ceiling, open his eyes, that he may see. Elias tried to pull away, but a wave of heat rushed through his arm, up his shoulder, and exploded behind his eyes. It was not painful, but it was intense, like staring into the sun without burning. He gasped and fell back against the wall, blinking rapidly. Look outside, Tobiah commanded. Elias scrambled to the mouth of the cave. He looked out into the valley. At first, he saw the darkening landscape, the river winding like a black snake, the distant campfires of the Roman patrol. The math remained the same, but then the view shifted. It was as if a second eyelid had been peeled back. The air began to shimmer, vibrating with a frequency he felt in his teeth. The darkness of the hills did not vanish, but it was suddenly populated. Fire. The hills were burning, but the brush was not consumed. The fire took shape. Elias's jaw dropped. He saw horses, massive, muscular beasts made of amber flame, their manes trailing sparks. He saw chariots, hundreds of them lined up along the ridges, their wheels turning with white-hot light. And standing in the chariots were figures, tall, terrifying, magnificent warriors clad in armor that shone like lightning. They held swords of fire that hummed with power. They were not looking at the Romans. They were looking at the cave. They were facing outward, a defensive ring of insurmountable power. The Roman patrol, which had seemed so formidable minutes ago, now looked like a collection of toy soldiers beneath the feet of giants. More are they who are with us. Tobiah's voice floated from inside the cave, than they who are with them. Elias stood trembling at the mouth of the cave. The fear that had been his constant companion, the cold knot in his stomach, evaporated instantly. It was impossible to be afraid when you saw this. The isolation he felt was a lie. The vulnerability was an illusion. He was not a fugitive hiding in a hole. He was a prince, under the protection of the High King's personal guard. The vision faded slowly, the fire dimming until only the stars remained, but the imprint was burned onto Elias's retinas. He stumbled back into the cave and collapsed onto the mat. "Did you see them?" Matthias asked softly. "Fire," Elias whispered. "Chariots of fire. Everywhere." "They have always been there," Tobias said, pouring more tea. "You just needed the prescription for your nearsightedness." Elias looked at his hands. He felt small, yet infinitely significant. Why? Why such power for one broken soldier and two old men? "Because you dwell," Matthias said. "You have made the Most High your habitation, and the king protects his house." Elias lay down that night, but he did not check the entrance. He did not listen for the sound of Roman boots. He closed his eyes and saw the amber glow of the horses on the ridge. For the first time in his life, he understood that he was invincible not because of his own strength, but because of the ring of fire that stood watch while he slept. The lion could roar all he wanted. The chariots were waiting. The capture, when it finally happened, was not a battle. It was a surrender to the inevitable logistics of the Roman occupation. Elias and Matthias were intercepted not by a legion, but by a select guard of the regional magistrate, a man known throughout Judea as Valerius the Lion. They were taken to a fortress overlooking the plains, a place of stone and iron designed to crush the spirit before it even broke the body. Elias stood in the center of the interrogation room. His hands were bound, but his head was high. Matthias stood beside him, leaning on his staff, looking more like a bored grandfather than a prisoner of the empire. The door opened, and Valerius entered. He was a massive man, wearing armor that gleamed with polished perfection. He did not shout. He moved with the prowling silence of a predator. This was the lion. He circled Elias, his boots echoing on the stone floor. "You are the soldier who ran," Valerius said, his voice a low rumble, "and you are the old fool who corrupted him." "I am a man who found a better fortress," Elias replied calmly. Valerius laughed, a sound devoid of humor. A better fortress? You are in my tower, standing in chains. Where is your God now? Is he hiding in the cracks of the wall? This was the roaring of the lion intimidation. It was designed to paralyze. In the past, Elias would have trembled. He would have bargained. But he had seen the chariots of fire. He looked at Valerius and saw not a giant, but a small man in a metal suit playing a role on a temporary stage. My God is in this room, Elias said, and he is not hiding. Valerius stopped circling. His eyes narrowed. He signaled to a guard, who stepped forward with a whip. You speak with arrogance. Pain usually corrects that. Then came the cobra. Valerius leaned in close, his voice changing from a roar to a hiss. Do not be stupid, Elias. No one knows you are here. No one is coming for you. You are forgotten. Your God has abandoned you to the wolves. Give me the names of the rebels in the hills, and I will let you live. Refuse, and you will die slowly, screaming into the silence. It was a venomous strike, the lie that whispered, you are alone, you are worthless, compromised to survive. Elias felt the poison try to enter his mind. Abandoned, forgotten, but he remembered the psalm. You shall tread upon the lion and the cobra, the young lion and the serpent you shall trample underfoot. Trampling was an act of aggression. It was an act of dominance. Elias took a step toward Valerius, causing the guards to tense. He did not attack. He simply invaded the lion's space. You lie, Elias stated, his voice ringing with authority. I am not forgotten. I am watched by eyes you cannot see, and as for your threats, they are empty. You have no power over me unless it is given to you from above. Valerius blinked, taken aback by the sheer audacity. I hold your life in my hand. You hold nothing but dust, Elias countered. You are a terror by night, Valerius. You are a noisy pestilence, but you are not the king. Valerius's face turned red with rage. He drew his gladius, the steel singing as it left the scabbard. I will cut out your tongue. He raised the blade. Elias did not flinch. He did not close his eyes. He stood on the promise. Suddenly, the floor of the fortress shuddered. It was a tremor, common in the Rift Valley, but the timing was impeccable. The heavy iron chandelier above Valerius, disturbed by the quake, swung violently. A metal link, rusted and old, snapped with a sharp crack. The heavy iron ring crashed down between Valerius and Elias. The impact was deafening. Dust plumed into the air. The blade was knocked from Valerius's hand, clattering across the stone. Valerius stumbled back, falling onto the floor, scrambling away like a frightened child. He looked up at Elias, who stood amidst the dust, untouched, unshaken. The young lion you shall trample, Matthias murmured from the corner. Elias looked down at the Roman official. The fear had shifted. It was no longer in the prisoner, it was in the captor. Pick up your sword, Elias said softly, or let us go. But know this, if you strike against a shield you cannot break. Valerius looked at the fallen chandelier, then at his trembling hand. He was a superstitious man. He knew when the gods or a god was warning him. Get them out, Valerius whispered, his voice shaking. Get them out of my fortress. They are cursed. Not cursed, Elias corrected as the guards hastily unlocked their chains, covered. They were cast out of the fortress gates just as the moon rose, stumbling into the cool night air. They were free, yet they were in the middle of the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Elias walked until his legs gave out. He collapsed in a grove of olive trees, reminiscent of the garden where the teacher had prayed. The adrenaline of the confrontation with Valerius faded, replaced by a profound, crushing exhaustion. He lay on the earth, staring up at the canopy of leaves. He had survived the storm. He had survived the snare. He had survived the plague, the battle, and the lion. But now, in the quiet, a question haunted him. Why? He was not a holy man like Matthias. He was a soldier with blood on his hands. He had doubts. He had fear. Why had the Almighty gone to such lengths to protect a broken vessel like him? Matthias sat beside him, sensing the turmoil. You are asking the question every soul asks when the danger passes. You are asking, what did I do to deserve this? I did nothing, Elias whispered. I stumbled. I doubted. I was arrogant. Listen to the voice of God in the psalm, Matthias said, his voice tender. He does not say, because he was perfect. I will deliver him. He does not say, because he was a mighty warrior, I will honor him. Matthias placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. He says, because he has set his love upon me, therefore I will deliver him. Elias felt tears prick his eyes. Love? My love is weak. It is flawed. It is set, Matthias answered. That is what matters. You set your heart on him. You chose him. You ran to him. God is not looking for a perfect performance, Elias. He is looking for a relationship. He rescues you because he delights in you. You are his. That is the only reason. He knows your name. I will set him on high because he has known my name. Elias closed his eyes and let the truth wash over him. It was not a transaction. He did not pay for protection with good deeds. It was a covenant of affection. The father protected the child not because the child was strong, but because the child was his. I will answer him, Matthias continued reciting. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. He was with me, Elias realized. In the room with Valerius, he was there. He was, Matthias agreed, and he is here now, in the quiet. This is the deliverance, Elias. Not just saving your skin, but saving your heart. He is restoring your dignity. Valerius tried to shame you. God honored you. Elias rolled onto his back and looked at the stars. For the first time, he did not see them as cold lights or navigational tools. He saw them as the ceiling of his father's house. A sense of belonging, deep and ancient, settled into his bones. He was no longer a soldier of Rome, nor a rebel of Judea. He was a beloved son of Elion. I love him, Elias whispered into the night. It was the most honest confession he had ever made. I do not understand him, but I love him. And that, Matthias said, lying down to rest, is the strongest shield of all. 40 years later, the sun was setting over a small vineyard in the hills of Galilee. The vines were heavy with purple grapes, glowing in the golden light. An old man sat on a stone bench beneath a fig tree. His hair was white as wool, and his face was a map of deep lines etched by wind, sun, and laughter. Elias watched his grandchildren playing in the dirt, chasing a small dog. They were safe. They were fed. They were free. He held a cup of wine in his hand, but he did not drink. He was simply savoring the moment. With long life I will satisfy him. The words had come true. He had not just lived a long time, he was satisfied. He had seen the Roman Empire crumble and change. He had seen the message of the teacher spread from Jerusalem to the ends of the earth. He had seen fear try to return 1,000 times, and 1,000 times he had pointed it to the door. A young man approached the gate. He was dusty, travel-worn, and his eyes darted nervously from side to side. He carried a sword at his hip, and his knuckles were white on the hilt. He looked exactly like Elias had looked that stormy night in the hidden village. Elias waved him over. Peace, traveler. The road is hard. The young man stopped, startled. I am looking for a place to hide. There are rumors of war in the south. Elias smiled. He reached into the folds of his robe and pulled out a scroll. It was new parchment, copied by his own hand from the original Matthias had carried. You can hide your body in a cave, Elias said, his voice raspy but strong. But fear will find you there. I know a better place, a secret place. The young man frowned, confused. Where is it? Is it a fortress? It is a shadow, Elias said, patting the empty space on the bench beside him. Sit. Let me tell you about the lion, the cobra, and the god who covers you with his feathers. The young man hesitated, then sat. As Elias began to speak the ancient words, he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High, the tension in the young man's shoulders began to drop. Elias looked at the horizon. He knew his own time was coming to a close soon, but he was not afraid. Death was no longer a terror. It was simply the final gate into the ultimate refuge. He had seen God's salvation on earth, and soon he would see it in glory. And show him my salvation, Elias whispered to himself, closing the scroll. He took a sip of the wine. It was sweet. The air was cool. The fortress stood firm, and Elias, the soldier who had learned to stop running, was finally, truly home.